Drake's own car needs a $400 repair. His stomach drops, not because $400 is an enormous sum, but because he genuinely doesn't have it sitting anywhere he can reach right now. Across town, the exact same repair happens to Daniel's car. Daniel pays it, texts a friend about his weekend plans, and forgets about it by dinner. Same repair, same $400, same country. Completely different day for each of them. The $400 itself barely matters in either direction. What matters is that one of them spent the rest of the night solving a problem he didn't need to have, and the other one didn't spend a second thinking about it again. Quick one before we get into this. If the real numbers behind financial fragility are useful, hit subscribe, new video every week. This isn't a vague impression or a rounded-off guess. It's a measured, annual statistic, tracked by the same government agency every single year. The Federal Reserve's own survey of household economics and decision-making found that 63% of American adults said they could cover a hypothetical $400 emergency expense using cash or its equivalent. That means 37%, better than 1 in 3 adults, could not. This number has held essentially flat across the 2024 and 2025 surveys, down slightly from a high of 68% in 2021. It's also worth being clear about what cash or its equivalent actually means. It's a deliberately wide definition. It includes money in checking, savings, or something that could be sold or borrowed against quickly. Even with that unusually generous definition, more than a full third of adults still fall short. This isn't a fringe problem at all. It's a coin flip adjacent reality for a genuinely huge share of the country. It's tempting to assume this is purely an income story, and income matters, but it isn't the whole picture. 2 people earning the same salary can land on opposite sides of this statistic, because the deciding factor isn't how much comes in each month. It's whether any of it is deliberately set aside before it gets spent on something else. Lifestyle tends to expand to fill whatever income arrives, which is exactly why a bigger paycheck doesn't automatically produce a bigger buffer unless something is specifically routed away from spending first. Someone earning $60,000 a year with an automatic $50 monthly transfer into a separate account will, over time, be in a completely different position than someone earning the same $60,000 with no separate account at all, even though their take-home pay is identical. It's worth putting real numbers next to income, though, because it does still matter. Recent surveys find roughly 72% of people earning under $50,000 report living paycheck to paycheck, compared to 53% of those earning $50,000 to $100,000 and 40% of those earning over $100,000. Notice that even in the highest bracket, 4 in 10 people are still living paycheck to paycheck, proof that income alone doesn't automatically produce a buffer. One of the fastest growing groups reporting this is actually the $100,000 to $200,000 range, where rising housing and childcare costs are absorbing income gains as fast as they arrive. Debt-to-income ratio is another useful, closely related number worth knowing here. Total monthly debt payments divided by gross monthly income. Lenders generally consider anything under 36% good. A high DT doesn't just affect loan approval. It's often the same reason there's nothing left at the end of the month to set aside for a repair like this one. For the 37% without cash on hand, the repair doesn't just vanish. It usually moves on to a credit card instead, which is exactly where a $400 problem quietly becomes a much bigger one over time. Average U.S. credit card interest currently runs around 21 to 22% APR. Paying only the minimum on a $5,000 balance at 20% APR takes more than 28 years to clear. A single $400 repair rarely reaches that extreme scale entirely on its own, but it's frequently how a much larger balance actually starts, especially when it lands right on top of other expenses already sitting on the same card. The mechanical repair itself was only ever a one-time cost. The interest on carrying it, if it isn't paid off quickly, is not. It recurs every single month until the entire balance is finally gone. Sometimes the repair doesn't even make it to a credit card. It comes straight out of a checking account that can't cover it, triggering an overdraft fee on top of the repair itself. Roughly 9% of account holders generate close to 80% of all overdraft fee revenue industry-wide, which is a strong signal that this isn't spread evenly at all. It concentrates heavily on people without any kind of buffer, turning one unplanned expense into two separate ones. A full emergency fund is usually sized at 3 to 6 months of living expenses. Based on the median U.S. monthly household expense of roughly $50,100, that puts a full fund somewhere between $15,300 and $30,600 for a typical household. A number large enough to feel intimidating if it's treated as the starting requirement. It isn't. A full 3 to 6 month fund is the end goal, not the entry price for financial stability, and treating it as a prerequisite for getting started is exactly what stops most people from starting at all. The number that actually matters for the $400 statistic is much smaller. Enough liquid cash to cover one unplanned expense in that range without reaching for a credit card. A starter buffer of $500 to $1,000 solves the specific problem this video opened with, long before the full 3 to 6 month target is anywhere close to complete. Treating this as two separate stages, rather than one intimidating number, changes the psychology entirely. Stage 1, the $500 to $1,000 starter buffer, solves the immediate $400 repair problem within weeks or months. Stage 2, the fuller 3 to 6 month fund, is a much longer-term project that continues in the background using the exact same automatic transfer, just for longer. Nobody needs to wait for Stage 2 to finish before getting the real, practical benefit of Stage 1. Where this money sits matters. A high-yield savings account has been paying somewhere in the 4 to 5% AP range in the 2024 to 2025 period, meaningfully better than a standard checking account paying close to nothing, while still keeping the money fully liquid and accessible within a day or two. This isn't an investment account, and it should never be treated like one. The entire point is that the money is boring, safe, and instantly reachable, not growing as fast as humanly possible, but always there exactly when it's genuinely needed. Opening this kind of account typically takes minutes, has no minimum balance at most providers, and requires no ongoing effort beyond an automatic transfer, which is exactly why it's the first move, not a project to plan around. Free tools make this easier to plan than it sounds, and there's no need to build a spreadsheet from scratch. Investor.gov's own savings goal calculator lets anyone enter a target amount, a time frame, and an interest rate, and get back the exact monthly contribution needed, removing the guesswork of how much should I actually be saving entirely. For context on the bigger picture this buffer feeds into, common retirement planning guidelines suggest having roughly 1 time salary saved by age 30, 3 times by 40, 6 times by 50, and 10 times by retirement age. The emergency buffer isn't separate from that trajectory. It's the first, smallest rung of the same ladder, and the one that prevents a single bad month from knocking someone backward on all the others. The 50-30-20 rule is a reasonable default. 50% of after-tax income toward needs, 30% toward wants, and 20% toward savings and debt repayment, including this exact buffer. For lower incomes where 50% for needs isn't realistic, a 60-20-20 split is a more honest starting point. Either way, the buffer isn't meant to compete with rent. It's meant to come out of the slice already earmarked for savings. One of the most common reasons budgets fail has nothing to do with big purchases. It's forgetting irregular expenses like car registration, annual subscriptions, or holiday gifts, and never tracking small, frequent purchases that quietly add up. Building in a 5 to 10% miscellaneous buffer specifically absorbs the surprises a rigid budget doesn't expect, which is exactly the category a $400 repair falls into. For anyone who consistently overspends against their own plan, zero-based budgeting, where every dollar of income is assigned a specific job across expenses, savings, and investments before the month starts, tends to be the most effective structure, even though it's more restrictive than a simple percentage rule. It helps to know where a typical budget is actually going before deciding where a buffer can realistically come from. On average, U.S. households spend about 33% of their budget on housing, 17% on transportation, 13% on food split roughly evenly between groceries and dining out, 8% on healthcare, and 5% on entertainment. The remaining categories, clothing, education, and everything else, add up to about 22% combined. A $50 a month buffer transfer is a small fraction of nearly any single one of these categories, which is exactly why it's realistic for most budgets to absorb without a dramatic lifestyle change. Windfalls are, by far, the fastest legitimate shortcut available here. A tax refund, a work bonus, or a one-time gift, redirected straight into the buffer instead of spending it, can cover the entire $500 to $1,000 starter target in a single transfer, turning a months-long plan into a same-day one. Run the actual numbers on a starter buffer, saving $100 a month into a high-yield account, earning 5% reaches $2,000 in about 20 months, under 2 years, with no market risk and no complicated strategy involved. At $200 a month, that same $2,000 target arrives in under a year. This is one of the few places in personal finance where the math is genuinely this simple. No market timing, no picking the right fund, no risk of loss, just a fixed monthly transfer and time. The buffer exists specifically so this video's opening scene never has to happen to whoever's watching. Once that starter buffer clears the $500 to $1,000 range, the same automatic transfer just keeps running, quietly building toward the fuller 3 to 6 month target discussed earlier, without requiring a second decision or a new plan. The habit, once built, does the rest of the work on its own. There's exactly one thing that reasonably comes before building this buffer: capturing a full employer 401k match, where one exists. It's an immediate, guaranteed return that a savings account can't compete with. Beyond that specific exception, this buffer takes priority over general investing. Building it is a higher priority than starting a brokerage account. Precisely because market investments can lose value temporarily, and nobody should be forced to sell an investment at a loss just to cover a car repair. This is the same logic that shows up across personal finance repeatedly. Match first, buffer second, everything else after. A simple, ordered sequence rather than a list of competing priorities. Once this exists, everything else in personal finance gets easier, not because the buffer earns much on its own, but because it removes the one situation that reliably knocks people off a budget they were otherwise sticking to. There's one quiet, common way this buffer gets drained without ever actually fixing the original problem it was built for, using it for things that aren't real emergencies at all. A car repair, a medical bill, or an unavoidable home repair genuinely qualifies. A sale, a limited time deal, or something merely inconvenient does not, no matter how urgent it feels in the moment. Protecting that definition of emergency carefully is just as important as building the fund itself in the first place. The other half of that discipline, refilling the buffer immediately after a legitimate use, before resuming any other discretionary spending. A buffer that's used once and never refilled isn't really a system at all. It's just a one-time coincidence that happened to help once. Percent of adults could cover a $400 emergency with cash. 37% could not. And that gap usually isn't about income. It's about whether any money was deliberately set aside first. Even among six-figure earners, 4 in 10 still live paycheck to paycheck, and unbuffered accounts can turn one $400 problem into an overdraft fee or a credit card balance that outlasts the repair by years. A high-yield account, a 5 to 10% buffer built into the budget, and a starter goal of $500 to $1,000, reachable in well under 2 years at $100 a month, or instantly with a redirected windfall, solves the exact problem this video opened with, before the fuller 3 to 6 month emergency fund is anywhere close to done. Protect it by only spending it on real emergencies, and refill it every time. This video is for educational purposes only and is not personalized financial advice. If this changed how you think about your own buffer, subscribe. New video every week. Check your own checking and savings balance right now against that $400 number. It takes 10 seconds and tells you exactly where you stand. Next up, how much you'd actually need invested to live off dividends alone.